Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Russ Jones, and surprisingly, I am all alone tonight. So I want to tell you that Brad has an illness in his family, happened unexpectedly. He's very private, but I know he would ask for you to send good thoughts and prayers, whatever it is that you would like to help him out with his family. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to tell you that tonight I have a guest. I'm going to go ahead and bring the guest on so you guys can hear. It's Robert Leiterman. And anybody that's familiar with Bigfoot world has heard this name. I mean, this is a guy that was a park ranger. He got interested in Bigfoot. He started doing expeditions for BFRO. He is friends with all the big names that you know in Bigfoot. He wrote a couple different books. He trains law enforcement and self-defense tactic. He's a black belt. I mean, this is one of those guys that, you know, he's in his early 60s and you think, how did he cram all that stuff into this short period of time? So I have been wanting to meet him forever. And so, Robert, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I guess I'm saying thanks for joining me. And, you know, because Brad's not here. I know you and I talked about this earlier today, and it seems weird. This is the 86th episode and the first one that Brad and I have not been together. So how are you this evening, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. I had a busy day. I mentioned I teach at the police academy, and I have to get up at 5:08 to be there by 6, and I make them do exercise stuff. And then I came back home, and then I had to be to the dojo by 9. So I spent about a couple hours there at the dojo trying to beef up my my self-defense tactics.
You know, it's
and some katas and stuff.
It's one of the things that I think that we all don't do a very good job. And I know Tim Holleran did the book, The Bigfoot Influencers, you know, but it's one book, and there were so many people that, you know, are going to be in these next couple ones that he does. But, you know, we don't know a lot about the people other than they like Bigfoot. So what are some of the interests and hobbies that you do? Some of the things that people wouldn't know in Bigfoot world?
Yeah, I think one of those is probably the thing I spend so much time these days is writing. I do realize I did write the book, and I had help with that. I had Rowdy do some things. I had Stephen do the editing and did the introduction, and I had Jamie Wayne do some other parts of it. But it's the writing thing. And many years ago, it's not that long ago. It's about almost. And a lot of people probably don't know this because it was 25 years ago. We have a whole new generation of squatchers.
Yeah.
So I said it only takes about 10 years for everybody to.
Yeah, stay right there on your front porch. You kind of cut out on me a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay now?
Hear you great. For the listeners, Robert lives in a place where he doesn't have great cell phone, so we're doing this audio tonight. And so he was kind enough. He's stuck on his front porch having to talk to us for the next hour. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I have, and I apologize if the roosters go off because I'm giving them eyeballs right now. They're sitting out in front. Yeah, they like to see if I'm busy, and then they come over and start making noise. So if they do, I'll throw rocks at it.
We had one show where which was the worst show I ever did in my life, and unfortunately, the guest has passed away now. But Larry Batson had on some. It wasn't a parrot; it was some kind of squawking bird from South Africa that needed to be put out of its misery, and it was just a horrible episode. So I think a couple roosters we're all good with.
Oh, good. They're being nice right now. The doves they come by to attack the feed tray. But going back to the earlier question, is 25. It's going to be the silver anniversary for the first Bigfoot book that I did write. It was fiction called The Bigfoot Mystery.
What was that about?
Kind of started the. Oh well, I'm glad you asked that. The nice thing about working in the parks is that all your inspiration and your locations you work in them, you live them. That's part of your beat. So I started the story out of park ranger, not really a park ranger, but a family moves to an area, and they're in this place called Grizzly Gulch, which is really Grizzly Creek, up Highway 36 here. And I worked there for about 10 years. But anyhow, so the family goes for a little visit, and that's their favorite park because it's close to the town of Springville, which happens to be the old name for Fortuna. And so they're out there, and their two boys go for a little walk. And while the boys are out for a little walk, they have an encounter. And the story is about their two boys trying to figure out what they experienced and what this is all about. So, of course, the boys have to go find out. So one of them lost his memory. The other one's trying to figure it out. So he goes to the library and he meets people, and then they kind of get out into the field, and then they get to see what research is like. And then they have encounters of their own. And that was book one. And then book two is called Yeti or Not, Here We Come. And by the way, for the record, Yeti or Not, Here We Come, I come up with that before they did research in the Himalayas. And they said, Yeti or Not, there they go, or something like that. But
that's hilarious. That's pretty freaking awesome.
So the title was kind of fun and catchy. So that went a long ways. And that's when I introduced the ranger character. So since I did a lot of public contact and the park was in the Redwoods, Humboldt Redwood State Park, I decided to use that location and kind of experiences that I did have. I kind of tweaked them a little bit and kind of made it like a typical day at the job. But that was fun. So you have a skeptical ranger having to decide whether or not he's going to buy into this. And then the third book of the trilogy was called Operation Redwood Quest. And I got a little excited since we're dealing with the environmentalist people all the time. What happens if the environmentalist people decide to hoax a Bigfoot encounter by getting one of their members to dress up as Sasquatch and scare people to get it dictated as an indicator species so they can stop the logging operation. So that was a blast. So it's been 25 years since I wrote those guys. So I'm rewriting those guys and fixing my grammatical issues, my run-on sentences, a few other odds and ends. Because, that was 25 years ago. I like to think I've come a long way for that.
Yeah.
So Stephen says, Robert, because the iUniverse is the publisher for these books, you're really not getting, they're not circulating. Very few people know about the other two books. The Bigfoot Mystery they knew about because I had Matt Moneymaker do the forward for it. That was kind of cool. And I was back with the BFRO. And so I decided to rewrite those guys and put them back out again, which the Bigfoot Mystery is going to be back out by fall. And it's going to be through Amazon because they're easy to work with.
Right.
And then I'll try to get the other two out eventually. But to answer your question is, writing is one of those things I like to do. So now I find myself doing many writing projects. And I have a recently family history approach to a book. I wrote with my cousins from Louisiana. That was pretty much fun. I kind of needed a translator for the first few months trying to figure out what he was saying.
I can only imagine.
But now I understand it. He said he didn't need a translator for me because I sounded like I was from California, so it was all good. Yeah, I didn't say cool or hang in there, dude, and all that other good stuff. But yeah, so the writing is something that I guess a lot of people don't really think about that I've been involved with because it's just mostly been videos. Then recently the podcasting and maybe a couple books here and there, but that's, now it's like I got 10 under my belt and I got a whole bunch more that I'm working on. And now that I'm retired, I just shift all my workloads to, instead of going to work every day, I go sit at my table and I start doing editing or rewriting or researching. And so those projects will never end, but it keeps me busy. It's like doing 2-day sessions. You give yourself a deadline, like a couple years per book, so to speak. And then you go through it and you work on it. I do 2 shifts. I do like a morning shift, then I do the afternoon and the evening shift, about 5 days a week. And then I try to live my life and say hi to my family.
Are you getting out in the woods any? Robert, are you getting out in the woods any?
Yes. That's the problem. It's always been is sometimes maybe I need to stay home a little bit more instead of being out somewhere else. But I think that's a squatching issue with every household. It's like, oh, you have a fishing husband or a football husband or a hockey husband. Yeah, you never see him. At least this is wholesome and some great information, and spending time with your friends in a nice environment is priceless. And I thoroughly enjoy that.
Let me ask.
But
go ahead.
Once you kind of get started on a project like the Bluff Creek Project, you kind of end up there a lot more. You go up and show people different locations, and we have camera project. We still have cameras out there. We still check on those.
Let me back up before you get into that, because I want to tell the people that the people are watching on YouTube. I'm holding up Robert's book. It's called the Bluff Creek Project, and of course, he's really, like I said, he's really well known. He's been the Bigfooter of the Year, Daniel Perez's award, or whatever you want to call it, a couple different times. One time because him and his group had found the actual Bluff Creek site for the Patterson Gimlin film. Everybody kind of knew where it was, but there was people that debated. There was like 3 different locations that people thought, and then this group goes in there. And won't you back us up a little bit about how all that came to be? And I want to get into your book, of course, then too.
Oh, no problem. It's like we never know what we're going to get into when we start a project or a hobby, so to speak.
Right.
So the gig I was on at the time, which is about 2010 and 29, I was with the BFRO and I was doing a bunch of videography work. And my new thing to keep myself busy was to interview people, do research, investigate some things, and document it with video stuff. And we were uploading it on the YouTube channel, the BFRO YouTube channel. And that's where all the work was going. So 115 videos later, and I had met Stephen a while back in 2007.
And for the listeners, you're talking about Stephen Struford?
Yes, talking about Stephen Struford.
Okay.
He was one of the original Bluff Creek Project guys, himself and Ian Carton.
Okay, Ian Carton.
Yeah, Ian Carton was a teacher who wanted to keep his job, so he wanted to remain kind of anonymous. And Stephen was working out of Bigfoot books. Mm-hmm. And I first met him in 2007. I want to say the 40th anniversary in Willow Creek at the Veterans Hall. Right. Where Daniel Perez was speaking. Anyhow, so after we did our jobs there, being good squatchers, and then we went out to Laos Camp and we sat around the fire, and that's where I got to know Stephen much better. Late at night, swapping lies and stories around the fire. And he kept bringing up this thing about the film site being mislocated and that they were working on it. And he met this other guy named, I don't know if he met Ian at the time then, but he was working on it, and that's as far as we got. Then I got involved with the video stuff, and then about I keep wanting to go 1900s because they're doing a bunch of research in 1900, but 2010, I finally got around to making an appointment with them. So I showed up in the fall, September, I want to say 2010. And I interviewed him because my gig was to have share his passion of trying to locate this site, which I can care less where it was, or it didn't make that much sense to me. I didn't care that much because why do I want to go to a place where some movie was filmed every year on the same date? I didn't think I was one of those zealots to do it, but I was thinking, I don't want to be sucked in the rabbit hole for that. So lo and behold, what you asked for. But anyhow, so I met him over Bigfoot books. So I'd never been there before. I've only talked to him on the phone. I met him in person at the Grange Hall. I met him in Yakima Roundup. He was up there for that. So I finally got to see his bookstore. So I showed up and I just finished the Bigfoot Museum, or the China Flat Museum in Willow Creek, filming a whole bunch of stuff in there, and I'm narrating here's a picture here, here's pencils you can buy. So I was narrating everything. So when I got to bookstore. Of course, camera goes on. I'm narrating into it. I'm walking up to the door, but Stephen leaves his door open, and you can hear the music blasting out of the door. For me, it reminded me of heavy metal, but he says, "Oh, it wasn't heavy metal," but that's what I remember. So I go walking in through the door, and it's super loud. And I don't know if you've ever been there before, but he has so many books that they were lined on in towers next to the bookshelves that were full. So I stopped, looked in, I'm looking for him, and I can't find him right at front, but then I see a head bob up behind the screen in the back. I go, there he is. So I walked in, narrating, filming, and he wasn't too happy about that. So we had a little quick, discussion. And it's like, remember, we talked about this? This is what we're supposed to do. And then I proceeded for the next hour or so, filming his PowerPoint, which is his computer screen, and his blog had everything you needed to know all lined out chronically. It was awesome. So I sat there listening to him, asking him a few questions, and he talked about there was 5 potential sites, and these are the players, and this is this, and this is like we were here, and I thought, well, this is interesting.
Right.
So after I filmed that, I was supposed to meet him back at Blouse Camp in a couple days. So when I left there, I went to Laos Camp and I hiked up the creek towards the film site, but I didn't know which one it was. I know where the MK Davis area was, and I knew where the Peter Byrne area was, but because he told me these things on there. But I've been to the MK Davis over the years a lot. I've seen the Peter Byrne tree, didn't know that's what it was. And I didn't go very much farther upstream because it was overgrown. And I thought, well, maybe it has to be down here because it's a big open gravel bar. So then, so I went around, I crossed the areas, I zigzagged, I spent a lot of time researching. And then I met with Stephen again at Laos Camp. And lo and behold, he had this guy with him. And this was Ian Carton. And they were the two guys who had met, I think, at Yakima Roundup. And they realized they had same mission statements. And so they were working together. So my job now was to film those two gentlemen discussing possible with it. So I did that for a couple of days. And by the end of the second or third day, I was now a member of the team because I said, this is kind of cool, actually. So I started, asking questions, and now I started acting like I'm a third member of the team, and it ended up being where we spent several different times together researching, exploring the different alleged sites. There's like 5 of them. Actually, there's more than that, but there's 5 that we settled for. And that was the farthest downstream was the MK Davis area. And then you move upstream past the Rocky Plug, and then that was the Peter Byrne area because it had a couple big trees with some acorn holes in them. And then we went farther upstream yet, and we got to the site because it's in his books of an area in that location, and that's what he was told. And so we treated that as the Christopher Murphy area, and then we moved upstream further to the Daniel Perez area. And the reason that was called Daniel Perez area because when was that? In 2003. I know I'm digressing for a moment, but back in 2003, during the symposium where I was a guest speaker for the lunch menu on Friday, on Sunday, they went up to go visit the site, but there's a little so anyhow, so that was the big mass confusion of it. And now we'll go back to normal time. But anyhow, so Ian Carton, remember running into Daniel Perez in that general, thus it's called the Daniel Perez site. And then the last area we've called the Barackman site because Stephen had sent emails to a lot of the players, and the only person to respond with the location that were called the Barackman site, which is up, and that we have found out after 2 years of research and confirmation that was the
Robert, you're cutting out just a little bit, so let's see if you can find a good place on your porch there. But just for the listener, so it was Cliff Barrickman from the TV show Finding Bigfoot, which had responded, and some of the other players didn't respond that believed that they had the thing. So in the end, you settled on that. Are you confident that that's the correct site for the Patterson-Gimlin film?
At that point, we didn't know quite what to think. We still had to do a bunch of research. But once he sent that map with the dot on it, that's an area we searched. What's interesting was when you go there and you stand and you look at things, it looks like it almost fits the pattern of it. But which a lot of people were using, the Bob Titmus map does not.
You're cutting out again there, but for the listeners, once again, so you were using the Bob Titmus map, but Bob Titmus was a renowned tracker and Bigfoot researcher who I believe went up to the Patterson-Gimlin site 5 days after the original film was made and cast some of the most impressive prints that were there. Is that right?
I want to say more like 9 days. But
9 days, okay.
There's a number between 7 and 9. The 3 days would be the guy who took the photographs of the prints.
Yeah.
And then I think I want to say 7. You know, this gets confusing after a while.
Oh,
you gotta look at it. It's written down.
Absolutely.
But between 7 or 9, somewhere between there, so don't quote me on it, is when they came up and they took a look at that. And that's when Titmus drew his sketch. He went up to the hillside. He said he saw the ferns were smashed on the side of the hill. And he thought most likely it was up there looking down, and it fit the storyline. So that's kind of what he had. And he did a little write-up for it, and he did a sketch. The sketch doesn't match the actual topography, which was actually confusing for a lot of people. And that's why it may possibly people like M.K. Davis thought about the site being farther downstream, because it fit more into the diagrams of the sketch than it did elsewhere. And plus he also heard, this is hearsay, you know, but there's a gentleman in 2003 who went downstream, saw that area and thought it might be, mentioned it to M.K. Davis. Mr. Davis liked the idea of it, and that's where he'd been pursuing that location. That's why he feels downstream was the proper place, but it is not.
So,
and yeah,
just you know, because I always have questions, heaven knows, but
yeah, no problem.
You know, one of the things I think that's interesting when we're looking at that, because Titmus was a tracker, and so in the film you see Patty walking up the beach, for lack of better terms, and then she disappears, and he followed her tracks, and she turned and went up the hillside, and then got up on the hill above them, and apparently was seated watching them down below. And I always wonder why, when I'm looking at that Patty didn't just go straight into the woods. You know what I mean? Because that happens all the time with sightings. Usually a Bigfoot won't move until it's been sighted. When it's sighted, you usually go straight for, you know, the nearest getaway place. But rather than walking straight up that hillside, you know, she went on up the creek. I mean, I know some people have speculated that, you know, maybe she had children or, you know, juveniles there, or maybe, you know, she was distracting Bob and Roger from them. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, you've been to the spot.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of speculation going on. Even Titmus had done some speculation himself. Whether or not that's where Bigfoot tracks are not going up to the top. Like if you go there now, it's a slide and it's loose and there's no tracking surface whatsoever. A lot of that forest area is duff covered in areas. It's hard to find any tracks in that as well. The sand, you can find the tracks in the sand, but a lot of the other topography is difficult because you're looking at an area in 1964 that was flooded.
Right.
And then in 67 is when the sighting took place.
Right.
And so a lot of the trees were scoured out, which created an open bar. And a lot of that was from siltation from the high water silting out and creating a flat area that currently is about 9 feet below the upper sandbar. So it's you can still see the upper sandbar. It's about 9 feet from the current river creek.
Okay.
But imagine in 1964, after the flooding and a massive devastating flood for the area, deposited 8 feet, 9 feet of silt. And so you have this flat area that's against canyon walls that's forested on both sides.
Right.
And a lot of that terrain is pretty steep. So you could get some scuffs and some disturbances on the sides of the edge, but it's real difficult to get some decent prints. Now, I wasn't there at the time of 1967.
Right.
But looking at the terrain, it's not real good tracking terrain. The best tracking areas would be boggy areas or wet sand areas near the creek itself, or the soft sand areas, because the sand up there is a decomposed, I forget the name of the rock parent material, but it's kind of bluish in color, and it's really, really fine. So you can actually leave fingerprints in it, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
But there was enough to leave real noticeable prints in it. As a matter of fact, I know I'm digressing a little bit, but it came to mind that it was said when John Green went up there, it was about 7, 8 months later, he went up there in June. So he goes up there in June, and there's still impressions in the soft sand, and maybe, I would assume, pieces of spilled plaster maybe still there, where they can tell kind of where the footprints were.
Right.
But then you have horse prints, and then you have human prints, but they could tell where some of the prints were. And at first, the question was, that was like 7, 8 months ago. How in the world are any impressions? So what Stephen and I did is we made a 14-inch impression, and we made a 2-inch impression. And we did that in late October before they closed the area off to the public. And when we got back up there in June, we looked at the impressions, and the impressions were still there, but you couldn't see any detail in it because the leaves were in them. But there's pictures in the book too that it kind of talks about that little story, and it's better than my memory is. But we talked about that bit of research and how they could have come back 7, 8 months later and seen the impressions, but it was difficult to tell if they were Sasquatch impressions or boot impressions or whatever. But I just wanted to throw that out there because, well,
right.
It came to mind.
One of the things that I was curious about, and I'm sure that a lot of the listeners are too. I mean, you're fortunate enough, you live out there, you've been there many, many times, but a lot of us are, I'm in West Virginia. A lot of the listeners are from all over the country. And, we haven't been to the Patterson-Gimlin site. We have it in our mind of this, what it must look like when you go down in there. But does it still to this day look like someplace that Bigfoot could be?
Oh, yeah. It's I think it's a magical place. I know it sounds corny, but I don't feel spooked down there. I feel at ease. I feel like it's a place you can relax. Because in 2000 end of 2010, they closed the road for the last 3/4 mile, a half mile down there. They closed the road off. So they put a big old berm. So you can't drive there since 2010, but you can walk down there. So when you get down there, it's all foot traffic. You can either walk down that road. By the way, that wasn't there in 1967. It's an addition. You can walk down that road called 12N 13H, and you can.
You kind of cut out there, Robert, but I'm assuming that area originally they shut it down in the winter. I'm assuming because it's not passable. Is that right?
Well, they shut it down because there's a virus that's been going through the trees of the Port Orford cedars, and it kills them over a period of time. And it's a waterborne, whatever you want to call it. And so it's transferred by water, which it could go downstream and kill trees, which it does if you go down Bluff Creek towards Fish Lake. That area gets closed off because of the dying trees. So there's Red Lake and there's Blue Lake up above it, and they close that area off. So right after hunting season, which is late October, they end up locking the gates, and they don't reopen them till June. And so that whole time, it's closed access to human activity. So that's a long time to be, having human access.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of cool when you think about it. So it's like a little wilderness sanctuary that's closed to human traffic for could be up to 8 months at a time. It depends on when the last snows are done and the last rains are falling.
Now, when you guys were down there spending all that time, did you guys have any type of Bigfoot interactions or hearing noises or anything?
Oh, yeah.
I lost you there for a second, so I just want to make sure I don't miss any of that, because I definitely want to hear that. You did have some type of, wood knocks or whatever it happens to be that you heard.
Yeah, we've heard wood knocks there. We've heard human voices. We've heard screams, and experience of being by myself over towards the berm, 12 and 13H. I parked the car waiting for other people to arrive. So I walk the 2.5 miles up the road to the place where the 12 and 13H road meets 12 and 13 road. And that's our cell reception. So you can make phone calls there. So right. I go up there, make a phone call, check in, tell my wife I'm still alive. So the insurance policy is still good. And then I was walking back down, and I was probably about a good 10 minutes down. And, they get that feeling you're being followed or watched.
Yeah.
And you feel it.
Yeah.
And you are, because you're in a forest, right? There's all those critters watching you. So you kind of expect it. But then I started what sounded like hearing footsteps. So I stop, and I can tell the footsteps are coming up above me. And as soon as I stopped, it sounded like it took a couple more steps and then stopped. And of course you're going, huh? So I'm standing there trying to look uphill, and you've been there before yourself, where if you're on a lower road and there's a forest up the slope,
yes,
whatever it is up top can look down and see you, but you can't look up through the trees and get a good look at them.
Right.
And so I couldn't tell what it was. So I continued walking, and then I heard it again. And then I stop, and then it stops. And I'm like, this is not a coincidence anymore. And we know there's bear traffic up there, but I've never had a bear stop when I stop or whatever. But I followed him and watched him stop and then look around and keep going. But this is something that sounded bipedal up above, and it's paralleling the section of road I'm on. And it's slowly getting closer as it's going downhill, just like I am. And it finally got to a point where I just kept walking. I'm going, I don't know what that is. I'm just going to keep walking. And I had hiking poles. So it was going click, 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 click. So you can hear me for miles coming. And so I finally decided just to keep going down. And I'm looking the whole time, and I see nothing, of course. And then when you go down that road, there's a section where it makes like a 270-degree turn. And that's the last straightaway to get to the berm. I got to that point, and I said, I want to know what it is. And so the path that it was taking continued.
Okay, just for a second there, Robert, I lost you when you said that the path that it was taking. Still kind of cutting out there. Whoops. I lost him there, so I'm sure he's going to be calling me back. He's trying to get better cell service than he has. The reality is that a lot of the researchers across the country are, they live in places where they can get in the woods. And Robert was a park ranger, and, so he's used to living in these kind of places. I'm sure that he probably lived in the park there for a while. Hey, there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. Got you back here. So I lost you when you said that you the turn at the 270-degree turn, the path that the animal or whatever it was taking, and I kind of lost you there.
Okay, no problem. I'll recap the last part. I think it was. So when I got to that 270-degree little turn there, I decided I'm going to stop and I'm going to wait and watch and see if it goes down that hill, it's going to drop into the ravine there and it'll pop up the other side and I'll see it. So I'm waiting and I can hear the snap of the sticks in the brush and it's now closer and then it makes a 90-degree turn. It starts heading down towards where I am and I still can't see anything. And it's picking up cadence because it's now going downhill. So, you know, I had my handgun with me, so I drew that out of my pack real quick, and I'm waiting, and I'm thinking, "Whoa, are you serious?" So then I switched it with my bear spray, and then I'm like, "Are you serious, Robert?" And then I shouldn't be there, so I started leaving. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So I started walking down the road.
So you're walking down the road. All right, I lost you there, Robert. I don't know if it's going to... There you sound like you're back.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, so you were walking down the road after
so
you...
I was walking.
Go ahead.
I was walking down the road, pack strung over my shoulder, pepper spray in my hand. I'm no longer using my poles to shove whatever it is. But if it's not that, it's something else, then I got a bigger problem than I want to, but I'm going to be using pepper spray.
You're cutting out some. Let's see if we can get you in a good spot there on the porch. We need your wife to come out and like make it like an antenna.
Maybe I can take that foil off my head and maybe hold it in the air a little bit.
Hey, you'd fit in right with Brad because, you know, he's all about the tinfoil stuff for sure.
Pretty funny.
So you felt like it was getting close to you.
It was more close. It was way close, a little uncomfortably close. And, you know, it's like part of you wants to know what it is. The other part of you doesn't need to know.
Yeah.
Because you're by yourself. You're walking down this road. You're vulnerable. You still got about a good 20 minutes to where your car's parked. And you're expecting guests, but, you know, they're supposed to be getting there by car.
Right.
So 10 minutes after I continue down the road, I hear a vehicle sound. And the vehicle comes down the road. And it ends up being the people I've been waiting for. So the first thing I say is, "Hey, did you guys see a bear?" They don't know, we didn't see anything. And then I didn't tell them the story. I said, okay. So I told them where they're almost to camp down the road there. And I finished walking down the road. And when I got back to camp, I talked about other things. But it's one of those experiences that you can't say it's a Bigfoot because you didn't see it.
Yeah, Robert, before we move on from the book, I wanted to ask you about the cover you have on the book. I don't know if the people that are watching can see very well. It's kind of a shot of an open forest in the Patterson-Gimlin film. It looks like it was taken from a drone.
Yeah, it was Rowdy's drone.
Okay, that's really a cool shot.
Yes.
Was that your idea to do that?
Well, Rowdy took the pictures. He did a lot of drone work. Actually, he had two drones. He had one drone that the old white one that's lost somewhere in the trees above the film site. That's a whole different story. But his newer one takes much clearer pictures. And the reason he can't find his other drone is because if you keep it on the GPS program, it jerks back and forth, and it looks like a real jerky shot.
Oh, okay.
But if you disconnect that, it's smooth. So he had disconnected it. The warning light came on that you better get back. He goes, one more pass. Well, that didn't work out well. But yeah, so the second drone, this is from that, does a really good job. And when you look at this picture, you can see the big trees, and you can see the bowling alley from right upper corner to the left side. That's the straightaway. It's about a quarter mile long before it makes another turn. That's called the bowling alley. And then when it makes its first 90-degree turn, and then you see there's this open area. I think that's what you were talking about.
Yes.
That's what's called the Hindens X. And that's an area where not exactly where Roger had his encounter, but it's where he was running after it with the camera rolling.
Okay.
And the three or four separate sides where he crosses the creek.
Yes.
And there's some logs on his left side. Well, there's still log debris because the nature puts it there and it gets caught. So there's always log debris, but nothing that's the size of the stump that's in the story that Titnish describes in the map. But that area right there, if you look up from it, where it looks like almost an arrow pointing up,
yes,
the gaps in the trees, that's an open area now that we did a lot of work on it. But that area was overgrown, but that was a natural opening that you could stoop over and walk through on your way down towards the back.
And just for some background, it's believed that, or speculated that Patty didn't hear Roger and Bob approaching on their horses because she was behind the large stump, maybe getting some water or whatever she was doing, and she just couldn't see them because the stump and the sound of the water was probably making some noises. Is that the general consensus? Yeah,
that makes sense because you're in a canyon, that water bounces off, the sound refracts off the hillside. If you're standing there looking north, there's a big hillside behind you and the sound refracts off of that. And the rest is the forest now, which absorbs the sound. But back then it was all bar. And so you can imagine that the sound just like the water just echoing everywhere, but it's nothing to reduce it. So I think that's a good chance that's the scenario for that.
So are you guys now going down there periodically to kind of trying to keep it clean? I know there was some fires in there last fall. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the fires, there was fires in the area. About 3 or 4 years ago, they burned pretty hot up above it, but I forget the name of the peak, but it happened to be just northeast of it. Fires cleared out a lot of the brush on the sides and on the ridges. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't hardly ever go down there because it's always moist and shaded for lots of times of the year. So the fuel moisture is a little higher, so it's harder to burn the debris down there.
Right.
But on the sides and the south aspect, it dries out a lot easier, so it's easier to burn stuff. And a good fire clears up, all that extra debris. It also increases the watershed, the view shed. It also gives new shoots and grasses for the next crop of vegetative, like deer or anything else that the predators like to, snack on.
Right.
So fire's good.
I know that when it originally got started, the Bluff Creek Project, it had started with a lot of cameras. I don't remember the number, maybe 20 something. And
I don't think not that many, but yeah, we had a dozen or so.
Okay, a dozen or so cameras. And so you guys were going in there, dropping the cameras. I was paying attention because I think back then I maybe had 30. And I know the Olympic Project was like maybe 50 or something at that time. And you guys were...
They were really into it. Yeah, they had a lot of camera.
And then I know that one of the remarkable things was that you guys had got film of a martin, the Humboldt martin, which the state of California believed was extinct, but you guys got it off the extinct list. And I'm sure that DNR and whatnot, whatever they call it out there, was very excited about that. Did you guys have any other good things on your game camera photos?
Oh yeah, let me go back to the Humboldt martin, and it wasn't believed to be extinct. It was very rare, and they were worried that there might have been because there was occasional sightings. Oregon had the same problem. I think Oregon passed an ordinance to not hunt them before California did because they're like a fur-bearing animal. They were on the list. I think in the 40s they were shutting that down, but they were very rare indeed, and we didn't think we would find one of those in our cameras. It was just like that camera that picked up the first one was in the Rocky Plug area, which is between the MK Davis area and the Peter Byrne area, which is downstream from the actual film site. And we had a debate where to put it. And since I've been using cameras doing law enforcement work and people don't look up, I go, yeah, let's put it up on that tree covering this choke point where the gravel bar was along the water's edge. And lo and behold, we saw one.
How cool is that?
It was great. It was like, what is that? Because it looked like it could have been a weasel or maybe a marten thing. We don't think it was a ferret because there must be ferrets up there. But we decided to go talk to the wildlife staff at Humboldt State University, and they said, "Oh, we think it's a marten, a Humboldt marten." And that's when we realized that they were not very common. And some believe they might have been good, photographs. They're lacking the good documentation. So when that went up, we got excited because, we weren't hiding our cameras. We tried for a little bit, but in the winter time for 8 months, all your plant material gets pushed down by the snow. We weren't making cases or putting them into protective molds. We were just locking them in place to make sure that the bears didn't rip them off the trees and stuff. And so anyhow, that was a good thing, and it happened pretty quick. We put the cameras out in the fall of 2012, and that winter, 2012 and 2013, we got the Humboldt Martin.
Did you think that you had any other pictures that might be Bigfoot related?
Well, we had this one shot that I forget the name of the footage, but for a while the guy thought it was a Bigfoot juvenile with his face on the ground, sniffing the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a picture of a bear standing like a bear, and then the next shot was him with his face down, smelling the ground. So it's definitely not a Bigfoot, but we've had a couple where they are out of focus, but. And we haven't really got a Sasquatch on film, and it's like a joke. Oh, but you don't get any bears. You get mountain lion, you get bobcats, bearcats are more rare than mountain lion in that area. You don't get those kind of things, and you don't get this, and you get lots of deer. We got elk, which is kind of cool.
Do you have an opinion on why you don't get any yet? I'm assuming it's still ongoing with the camera project.
Are you talking about why we don't get any Bigfoots?
Yeah.
I don't know. I do know that we don't hide our cameras. They're out in the open because they're out for a long time unattended.
Right.
And we did put them across the film site. And even though there's a good possibility that Patty walked across the film site in 67, it doesn't mean that they're still in the area, and it doesn't mean that it really was a Bigfoot. We don't know for sure. We're not 100% on anything. And we just haven't. With that said, I've had rocks tossed in my direction before. I've had, whistles. I've had calls. I've had mimicking. I've had ladies talking and then laughing. And then when I call out to them, they get quiet. And I've had, just that feeling. And talk about mimicking. It's like, I remember I was in the tent one time, and I was woken up by two phrases. One of them I'm not going to repeat. And the second phrase was, Buenos dias. And it woke me up from the tent, and it was just my wife and I were camping at the berm. And I kind of heard that, which is interesting because that is a dear friend, Mike Mraz, who passed away, was bilingual. And for years, he'd been going to that location, and he met some interesting players there. He met Renee DeHinden at Laos Camp a while back. So he's met some interesting people and had an opportunity to do that, but he was bilingual. And we spread his ashes at the film site that summer before. And this is in the fall. So whether you're superstitious or whether you believe a lot of these different things, it's just that it was a accident voice saying Buenos dias around my tent at 3 a.m. when there's nobody else anywhere to be found. And it's a place that he frequented with us, and prior to that, near the actual film site. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But having rocks tossed or calls, and even from that same location, I went ahead and I played my flute. And I usually I even play a didgeridoo up there. So I'll make some loud calls. Go get the dog. I make some loud calls, and I listen to the echoes. I listen to the feedback, and it was just like I was playing my flute. And then I think Jamie had his recorder system up there going down the hillside, and he stops me. And I think, come here. So I stopped playing and went over to him, and it sounded like a flute was being played down in the canyon.
That's
and then,
interesting.
And then, of course, you play it back. It's not as good as hearing it itself. It's never as good as hearing it yourself, but listen to a recording of it. And it sounds like a freaking flute. And it just makes you wonder, is that like mimicking, or is my imagination going crazy? But there's two of us, we both heard the same thing. Or is it just a bird and the echoing makes it sound like that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the rational side of me, the science-minded person that I am, and in terms of the Buenos Dias, it just makes me wonder if they weren't around when your friend was there and they just heard him say it, or maybe he commonly said it, or maybe he, said it to them when he was there by himself, just trying to, have an interaction or something. But, it brings up a thing. I mean, you're a ranger, you were a ranger for years, you retired, you have been involved in Bigfoot. How do you feel about the woo side of Bigfoot? Where are you at on that?
It's funny because I started out scientific approach all the way, and skeptical, of course. And then I get suckered in the rabbit hole, And I'm my worst critic. And every time I have an experience that I try to explain it away. And
Robert, I lost you there for a second after you said that you were trying to explain some of your experiences away.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time explaining my experiences away because I'm trying to be scientific and rational. And if you spend your whole life in a public contact where you're respected for what you do, you start talking about, I hear voices, or, I watch them jump through portals. Now, most people don't take that very kindly. They kind of put you in a category. But going back to that category that we have the flesh and blood camp, and then we have the other camp. It's just like, when I hear stories, I have friends in both camps, and when I hear the stories and there, and I have no idea, I can hear the recording they have if they have a recording.
Right.
I hear the stories, but I can't just prove it just by listening to a tape. I have to ask, okay, what time of day was it? What time of year was it? Where were you at? Who else was with you? Everybody accounted for. So those are the typical check. So people are having an experience that they're having, and I'm not there. And when they tell me about it, it's not fair for me to say, oh, you're full of shit. That's you're making this crap up, because I wasn't there.
Right.
Now, if I'm there side by side and I'm listening to them and I don't hear any of that, and they hear it, well, again, there are people on this planet that are sensitive and hear things that some of us do not hear. And for me to say that, well, you're making that up, that'd be a little unfair on my side.
I know. I mean, it's hard, right? Because I've never had any of those experiences myself, and I hear people say them. And then if I say, well, everybody knows how much time I've been in the woods and I have never had anything happen, then their answer to that, which is kind of, not something you can debate, is that they'll say, well, maybe you're just not open enough to have that experience or something like that.
Yes. There's a good friend of mine who, I'm a storyteller, and I share a lot of my experiences around the campfire, and take it or leave it for what it is. I don't have to make shit up. I've experienced a lot of stuff. So I share some of these things because I think people need to know. And sometimes it's good to share. And then you can say, well, you're not that crazy, Robert. but sitting there talking about it, it's just like, well, that never happens to me. And then my response is, be careful what you ask for. We all have different backgrounds. We come from different tribes. We have different ways of looking at things, and we're taught different things. And I was always taught by my mom about, spirits have spirits and this and that. She was brought up that way. And then my dad was brought up, hardcore Catholic, not buying into a lot of the other things. So, but when you have an experience and you're like, this happened to me, and you're like, okay, how did this happen to me? Because I'm my worst critic. Like, Buenos Dias. All right. Is there somebody hiding around my tent? And then you think about, well, okay, there's probably some migrants are growing dope in that area, which it isn't the case for that area. You're talking about a steep hillside to get to you first. And you're talking about one of the most underused Forest Service land areas in the United States. You know, it doesn't get a lot of people.
Right.
And then you're talking about, well, you have to go down that road to get to be where we are. And I found out later, you know, the next day that Rowdy showed up late, but he stayed at the top. So nobody drove down that road. And it wasn't him. He did come all the way down, hike all the way down just to go to the edge of my tent to say, Buenos dias from the shadows.
When you're carrying a weapon.
Yeah. And I think about this, and then it wasn't till later when I realized, when I thought about when Mike Mraz had passed away because of COVID, and in July, and it's just like that was he passed away in July, and this incident took place in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place we spent together, and he had gone there. He met his wife there. This place was sacred to him, and he had a buddy he'd always go with. And then he stopped going. And then it wasn't until he decided to go again that he saw that little sign-in sheet we had at the film site that he left us a note. And that's how we got a hold of him, and we met. He became a member of our group, and we spent a good quality time together. And he is going to truly be missed because I really enjoyed his company.
Yeah.
But was that him trying to say something to me and let me know that everything was good? You never know. I mean, I don't know about the woo part but there is the spiritual, you know, the ghost part that's, you know, we have to think about in some places. You don't have to go to a haunted house to have an experience of the supernatural, I guess.
Right.
What some people call supernatural, some people might call it's just your imagination, but to each their own. I just know that I wish there was a second person that could have heard it. That way I can, you know, run it by them and say, did you hear what I hear? What did you hear?
Right.
And that's always a good check and balance is to, if there's a second party there that hears the same thing you hear and you don't coach them, that's got to mean something to you.
Right.
Because I was over another place where I had something weird go off. It was in Washington. It was over at Bumping Lake area where Bart had his thermal footage. And it's just his first thermal footage. Anyhow, it's just like there's a camp up there that I had weird stuff go on that I can't explain. And I didn't say anything until another member that was there 2 days later had a similar experience. And we talked about it after the fact. As a matter of fact, he was talking about it with somebody else in confidence, and I overheard it. And then it was very similar to mine, but yet different in the same camp. And I'm like, there's something to this. And then if you talk to, and I had some woo friends I shared with, and of course, their opinion of it was, gee, that was the old ancient Bigfoot that's trying to get a hold of you and talking to you, you know, and that's not where my mind went. My mind went to a dark place where it made me feel uncomfortable to a point of being frightened. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think it was a Bigfoot related activity. To me, it was much darker than that. And there are some places that I've been to in the woods where your hair stands on end for no reason, or you get these feelings, or it's just, you want to leave. It's like, I'm out of here. I'm not staying. Right. And whether that's a Bigfoot trying to vibe you out of there or use infrasound or whatever, it's something, energy, dark, whatever, is making me feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I was scared easy. You got to work hard to get me scared. But there's been a few times where I listened to my my left side of my brain going, get the hell out of there. Mm-hmm. And I've done that. But I haven't had the experience where you're in your camp and you got a creature screaming at you from the shadows. I haven't experienced that.
Right.
It's like kind of subtle. Like, here's another one for you. A place called Twin Lakes. I was there with Bart Cutano, and I was there with Jim Bobo Fay. And I was doing podcasting, and I was interviewing them in campsites, but we were kicking back. So before I started doing the interviews, I went to the side of the creek. It was like late afternoon, and I was playing my flute, which means for Robert is you blow it as hard as you can so it echoes off the hillside and skips across the water. And then if anything from miles around will hear you, you know, it's like, hey, here we are. And then I proceed to pretend like I know how to play a flute. And while I was doing that, I heard a bunch of commotion going on behind me up at the road where the campsite is. And I was trying to record myself for some background music and stuff to be used in a program later. And it kept on, I couldn't record it because they were making too much noise. So I stopped and went up to see what's going on. And then Bobo told me, he goes, yeah, hey, dude, I was sitting in the back of my car, standing there on the back bed on the road. And he says, I heard a rock land behind him and bounce on the road, and it dropped down towards the lake. And I'm thinking, what? So he told me again. Of course, he didn't say anything. And I'm thinking, which rock? Let's find it. Let's look for fingerprints or whatever. But the hillside was not steep enough for a rock to roll down. It had to be thrown.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like your scientific approach. Like, what's the percent slope? What is the parent material? Can a bird drop it, or does it fall off? What dislodged it to cause it to roll down the hill? Well, It hit the road twice behind him and then bounced down the hillside. After I was making that loud screaming noise with my flute.
Right.
So evidently, I wasn't very popular with my playing up there. There was some protesting going on.
Hey, so we are winding down here, and so I want to know, people want to get your books. I didn't even know you had written other things. Yeah. And of course, the Bluff Creek Project, great book, really informative. And of course, the Patterson-Gimlin film and the site is a big deal for anybody that's interested in Bigfoot. But how do people get a hold of your books? Where would you like them to go?
I think the easiest thing to get a hold of the Bluff Creek Project is to go on Amazon, because Amazon's, it's a self-published book, but Amazon's the publisher company that makes it available. And just get my name, Robert Leiterman, or just go to the Bluff Creek Project and it'll pop up. You can get it as an ebook, which is a lot cheaper, or you can get it as the paperback.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was telling you earlier today that how interesting it was that a lot of us have became friends and met through Bigfoot. And I'm glad to finally have gotten a chance to talk to you. I appreciate you. I look forward to meeting you in the field one day, and maybe I'll be able to make my way down there and you can be my guide in that area and give me the history of it.
That'd be a pleasure. That's a service that we provide after 4th of July weekend. We're available up there for people just to show up. And I've been up and down the hillside. One time I went down and up, it'd be like a 2-mile round trip. I went down and up like 3 times that day. Just people show up. Hey, no problem. I'll take you down there. And of course, hey, you want to buy one of the books? But I take them down there, talk about the, different places, walk them through the areas, talk about the stumps and locations and frame 352 and the Dehan 71. And it's kind of neat because it's like eye opener. It's like, I wish somebody would have done that for me many years ago. And I would have looked at the film site in a different light than just a tourist trap for Bigfooters.
Right. Well, Robert, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you, and we'll catch you on down the road.
All right. It's been my pleasure.
I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.